All right, wonderful. So welcome to the May 24th, 2021 Special Zoning Board meeting for the Preet application. We start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United
States
of America
and to the
the
republic
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just a quick reminder, we're going to shoot for a hard stop at 10 o'clock so we don't run into the marathon hours. And Mr. Solicitor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Preliminarily, this evening, we have received correspondence from Mr. Gundlach, who is present this evening. Mr. Gundlach represents Plymouth Meeting KPG Roman numeral 3 LLC, which is the legal owner of tax parcel number 49-00-04120-01-6, located at 502 Germantown Pike in Plymouth Township. That is a property that is adjacent to the subject property. And on behalf of his client, Mr. Gundlach sent a letter dated May 14th, 2021 to Dave Conroy at the township, asking that his client be granted party status, also attaching a map that shows the relative locations of the Preet property and his client's property. We will mark that as Exhibit B for Board 6. We also got a subsequent letter from Mr. Gundlach dated today, May 24th, 2021, addressed to me at my firm address, reiterating the request for party status, advising that he will be attending the hearing this evening, and copying Mr. Kaplan and Mr. Amuso. That we will mark as Exhibit B7. Mr. Gundlach has made a request for party status for what we will call, in short, KPG. And I would like to ask the parties respectively whether they have any objections or other comments to that request. Mr. Kaplan.
Excuse me. It's an unusual request. I saw Mr. Gundlach's letter today, and he says that in the middle of the letter, some of the facts related to Preet's application are different from Keystone's application. Nonetheless, the legal theories for the requested zoning relief are similar. Usually, people with one-party status are opposed to the application. This one comes way, way late in the proceeding, but Rob does not say that he's opposed to our application. So if he's not opposed to our application, I'd like to hear from Mr. Gundlach or his client on the basis for which they want to gain party status, particularly at this late date. Depending upon what he says, I may not be opposed to it, Dave.
Okay, well, why don't we we'll let Mr. Gundlach comment. Let's go to Mr. Amuso before we go to Mr. Gundlach.
Thanks, Mr. Sander. I just want to, Mr. Gundlach in his correspondence says that his client didn't get notice of this hearing. I mean, I note that we're pretty far into the process as well, but I believe they did get notice. Do you know one way or the other, Mr. Sander or Mr. Conroy?
Both, well, when I received Mr. Gundlach's first letter dated May 14th, Exhibit B6, I immediately reached out to Mr. Conroy, who supplied me with the list of properties that were notified of the hearing, and this property owner and property were listed. on that list. That's
All right,
all, that's best we know.
All right, I mean, so they got notice. Look, they're a property adjacent to this property. I'm sure Mr. Gunlock will be able to articulate some kind of impact. So I don't think I'm going to be opposed to party status.
Okay, let's let Mr. Gunlock comment. Mr. Gunlock?
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I do represent Plymouth Meeting KPG Roman numeral 3 LLC, and they do own the property that you identified, which is not only adjacent, but I would characterize it as somewhere in the center of the Plymouth Meeting Mall property. According to my client, they did not receive the notice of the hearing and just recently found out regarding the pending proceedings. They're not objecting to that because they now have notice of the proceedings, so they're waiving any objections related to it, but it sounds like that notice, per your records, David, was provided. So as far as the late notice, it's because they just were not aware of these pending proceedings, or they would have requested party status from the beginning. The purpose of their requesting party status is that they are, as I indicated in my letter, looking to protect their right to redevelop their existing building and property for apartment use, elderly housing, assisted living use, or any other use permitted under the zoning ordinance. And the reason we reference that is because it's indicated that this property is part of the Plymouth Meeting Mall, and there are shared easements and access ways. And my client wants to ensure that any decision that comes out of this does not adversely impact them or their future plans for the development or redevelopment of their property. As far as addressing Mr. Kaplan's comments, yes, we did indicate that we do have a pending application, and the facts are somewhat different. We were just pointing that out. That is correct. At this point, Keystone has no plans to oppose the pending application, but certainly wants to keep apprised as to the facts relating to the application, any conditions that may be imposed on the grant of the application, and or any settlements that might in some way impact what we call the Keystone property. I don't plan to call any witnesses, and I don't plan to conduct any cross-examination unless there were certain conditions offered that might adversely impact the Keystone property and its future use and or development.
Having heard that, I'll go back to you, Mr. Kaplan. Any objection to KPG receiving party status?
I don't think so, as long as Mr. Gunlock and I are in agreement. I just have one or two more sentences. So just so I understand, if our application for a special exception for the apartment use on the property were granted by the zoning hearing board without any conditions, it's my understanding that that would not negatively affect Mr. Gunlock's client. And if Mr. Gunlock agrees to that, then I don't see why we should spend any more time. And if he wants to have party status and he's not going to call any witnesses and he's not going to cross-examine anybody, not a problem. Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Mr. Gunlock, response?
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's asking me. I haven't seen the entire application. I haven't seen any of the exhibits. So at this point, I'm not sure if there's anything that's being requested or proposed that may adversely impact my client or my client's property. But again, Mark, if there are no conditions or there's no information that's being submitted as part of your application to adversely impact our property, then we're not here to oppose you. I believe my client would like to see your exhibits and what's being proposed. And if that doesn't adversely impact them, then they will not have any opposition to your plan.
Well, that's great. And I plan to call witnesses tonight that will show you your client's property in relationship to the mall and the rest of the property and all the things that we propose to do to make circulation through the mall better. So, David, under those circumstances, I have no objection, and I'd like to get to my rebuttal so that we can use as much as tonight's time as possible.
Outstanding, Mr. Kaplan. Thank you. Mr. Amuso.
I have nothing further to say on the subject. I'll defer to your ruling.
Thank you, Mr. Amuso. The zoning hearing board will grant, well, let me do this instead of just making the decision. My recommendation is that the zoning hearing board grant party status to Plymouth Meeting KPG Roman numeral 3 LLC to become a party to this matter. Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make a motion to that effect.
Mr. Daly made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Ramondo has seconded it. We don't need a roll call vote for this. I'll just ask for all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. It's a 5-0 vote, and party status is relegated to Plymouth Meeting KPG 3 LLC. Mr. Kaplan, we left off with the potential for additional cross-examination by you of Mr. Mason and Mr. Graham.
No, I have no more cross-examination. I wanted
Excellent.
to get on with however we characterize it, maybe my rebuttal, Mr. Sander.
That's fine. If you want to move on, no additional cross for Mr. Mason and Mr. Graham. We will move to your rebuttal case, Mr. Kaplan.
Thank you.
Oh, well, before we do, I better ask Mr. Amuso. Mr. Amuso, does the township have any additional testimony that it wishes to present?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kaplan?
Okay, so I'd like to begin this evening by calling Joe DeSantis, our traffic engineer.
Yeah, and
Mr. DeSantis?
I would object.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Mr.
Sander,
Amuso?
Wait, 1 second. Peter, were you going to interrupt me in the middle of my first sentence?
I am objecting. I'm concerned about what you just said about presenting for better circulation. I mean, you already put on your case. What's Mr. DeSantis going to testify in terms of rebutting by an expert witness?
You had your traffic engineer come in here on 2 nights and present absolutely bizarre testimony. And I'm calling Joe DeSantis to present our traffic engineer's testimony. Excuse me, your traffic engineer critiqued and criticized just about everything about our traffic impact study. And I will recall or call Joe DeSantis.
You can't recall. If you want to put on a rebuttal case, you can put on a rebuttal case, but you don't just recall witnesses because you don't like what my witnesses said.
Peter, whatever you want to call it, you want to call it rebuttal, I'll call it rebuttal. We have had a very unusual situation in this case with regard to the traffic testimony, and it's gone back and forth. Let's not waste time with what labels there are. I want to put Joe on.
Let's waste time with due process. You put on your case, I put on my case. You're entitled to rebuttal, but you're not entitled to just simply recall your witnesses and add new things that you now want to add for circulation.
You might have argument about some of my other witnesses, but your traffic engineer critiqued in 2 nights my client's traffic impact study, and I have the absolute right, call it rebuttal if you want, to correct all of the misinformation that your traffic engineer
We
purvey.
didn't introduce any new evidence. I mean,
Well,
rebuttal.
that, it's good, gentlemen, it'll be limited to, we need to limit it to rebuttal testimony. Mr. Kaplan, you can call Mr. DeSantis for rebuttal, but let's limit it to rebuttal testimony. Testimony that is designed to counter, for lack of a better word, the testimony that Mr. Amuso's experts put on, not to reiterate or add to the testimony that you've already presented Mr. DeSantis for.
Well, I was going to save this part of my presentation until we got to the other witnesses, Mr. Sander. And this has been a very unusual proceeding. In the middle of Mr. Amuso's case, the zoning hearing board, trying to do their job the best they can, raised literally hundreds of questions. In an unusual situation, I thought we were before a planning commission. And some of those questions were raised about access, access to certain intersections, circulation. Suggestions were made as to how access should be limited. So there are two bases on which I intend to present Mr. DeSantis. Number one, Mr. Graham's testimony deserves rebuttal, and this board's questions regarding a number of aspects of the mall are also fair game. In fact, I have the quotations, Dave. I don't want to waste the time doing this. I'd rather get on with it. But there are multiple questions that were asked by this board, and we went through this before.
And his witnesses had an opportunity to answer.
Excuse me.
How many bites at this apple do you need?
Hold on, Mr. Amuso, just let Mr. Kaplan finish. I will go to you as soon as he's done.
I'm gonna, why don't we just let me put on Mr. DeSantis, and Mr. Amuso can object to whatever he wants to object to.
No, but he's objecting to calling this witness. Let me just try to get us on a path here. As I said, it is not atypical, Mr. Kaplan, you know, because you've been through a lot more of these than I have. It is not atypical for a zoning hearing board to ask questions during a hearing. Almost every witness that appears in front of a zoning hearing board, the first thing that happens the first thing that happens after cross-examination is board questions. And it's not uncommon for them to ask questions. When they ask the questions, your witness was there. Mr. DeSantis answered those questions. So I don't see that asking questions by the board and then thinking of the answers later should be entitled to you being able to recall Mr. DeSantis to answer questions that he already answered. Well, rebuttal is a different thing. Rebuttal is coming back after Mr. Amuso's client testified and testifying counter to his evidence. But the questions from the board were already answered by Mr. DeSantis and your other witnesses when they were asked. So we need to limit the testimony of Mr. DeSantis and your other rebuttal witnesses to rebuttal that arises from Mr. Amuso's client's testimony.
So Dave, you're generally right. You're generally right. If it were my witness who was on the stand at the time, after I presented direct testimony and Mr. Amuso had cross-examined, and if the board then were to ask questions of my witnesses, you're absolutely right.
That's what happened.
No, it's not what happened. Please, Peter, I'm not in.
Wait, so first of all, we agreed.
Dave,
We agreed.
Hold on, stop,
can I
because our
please-
core reporter can't get any of this down. We've got to stop talking over one another. We can't do this.
So can I finish before I'm interrupted?
Please finish.
If you go back and you look at the transcript, we were in the middle of Mr. Amuso's case. We were near the end of the night, and the board started to ask questions, not of the witness that Mr. Amuso had before the board, but general questions. And we tried to answer them on the cuff, and we ran out of time. And there are a whole series, and I have extracted every one of them, of questions that were raised by the board. And I have the right, they were not cross-examination questions. You allowed them to ask those questions, and we were like at a planning commission. So and they were questions that were very, very broad. And I can't have a record where these questions have gone unanswered. Joe DeSantis is the easiest one because Mr. Graham testified to every aspect of our traffic report and our plans. And Joe DeSantis is easy. I have the right to call him on rebuttal. And when Mr. Amuso wants to object, he can object. But you're not even letting me get my witness up there.
Okay, I'm just trying to, because there's been a preliminary concern expressed by Mr. Amuso, I'm just trying to get us to a point where we can proceed with rebuttal testimony.
May I
All
respond?
right, but
Let's let Mr. Amuso respond.
sure.
So, you know.
Excuse me, Mr. Musso, you froze. Excuse me, Mr. Musso, you froze.
Did I?
Mr. Sander?
Yeah,
I
Mr.
hear
Amuso,
you.
you froze. You're gonna have to start your
I'm
comments
here.
from the beginning.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I said was virtually everything Mr. Kaplan just said is incorrect. What we had and what we agreed to is that he would put on all his witnesses. And then at the completion of that, the board would be able to ask his witnesses questions, and which is, as Mr. Sander points out, is typical. And so to use now the agreement that we had to make things more efficient as some kind of opening to some new world of procedure that none of us have seen before, calling recall and new witnesses and new facts is wrong. And the danger, of course, is that any decision the zoning hearing board would make after hearing this new evidence and different witnesses and new facts, it's not rebuttal, would make any decision they make problematic. So this has been a very typical hearing where one side puts on their witnesses, and then often we let the board ask questions of all witnesses at the end of one case. And we did the same thing for me. His witnesses had ample time to answer all the questions. I think we went late the night that the board asked questions, and Mr. Sander even ended it. Anybody have any more questions? No. Anybody have anything else to say? No. There was no, Mr. Kaplan didn't say, hey, we haven't been able to answer questions, and we want more time to put on more witnesses. The board asked their questions. They were answered. Then I put on my case. At the end of my case,
That's just not true.
Okay.
It's just
Hold on,
not
Mr. Kaplan,
accurate.
let Mr. Amuso finish.
I did it to him, so I understand.
I know.
So there's just no such thing as a recall case, that Mr. Kaplan's had more than enough time to put on his witnesses. I had more than enough time to cross-examine. The board had more than enough time to ask questions, and those questions were answered, and the same thing happened to me. So again, he wants to put Mr. DeSanto on to rebut facts and evidence that Mr. Graham put in. fine, it's his right, and I will.
That,
you know,
okay, then that's what we're gonna limit it to. Mr. Kaplan, please call Mr. If it's your wish, please call Mr. DeSantis on rebuttal.
Mr. DeSantis, please state your full name for the record, so I may swear you in again for the record.
So my name is Joseph DeSantis, DeSantis.
Raise your right hand, please, sir, so I may swear you in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. DeSantis, in light of the ruling, I'm going to ask these questions a little bit different than in the fashion that I did. I would like you to bring up your first chart that we have talked about. Would you please do that? Now,
I object. What's rebutting? This is your chart.
excuse me.
Well, hold on. We don't know what this is yet.
All right.
We don't know what, let's find out what this is. For all I know, this could be exhibit A, something that we looked at before. I don't know.
Well, I don't doubt that this is an exhibit we've seen before, but my point is, it's not rebutting anything that my witness.
Do I get to ask a question?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Kaplan.
Before you make a speech, Peter?
Yes, Mr. Kaplan, you do. That's, proceed. Please proceed. Please proceed.
Mr. DeSantis, were you here when Mr. Graham testified about the amount of traffic that exists on all of the intersections that you investigated during, or you studied during your traffic impact study investigation?
Yes, I did hear his testimony.
And Mr. Graham, if I remember it correctly, took a 2005 or 2006
I
traffic.
object to this line of questioning. The only reason he did that is because the applicant never gave us the report. So you're gonna take advantage of not giving us the report?
You had the report.
We did not have, all right, let's go to the.
That's not true, Mr. Kaplan. They didn't have the report initially. They asked for the report because they did not have it initially. They did not have the full report. They just had a summary, I believe. And they ultimately got, Mr. Amuso, your client ultimately got the full report.
Yep.
Correct?
Yes, and that's what we testified last time.
Okay.
But the time before that's in the record, Mr. Graham made calculations based on a 2005 study and told us based on that what the existing traffic counts were around the mall. And I want to present testimony to rebut that and to then explain the traffic report in response to what his testimony was.
Okay, let me say this. We'll allow it. Mr. Amuso, you can ask Mr. DeSantis on rebuttal regarding the difference between the testimony that he's asking, that Mr. Kaplan's asking him about now versus what your expert testified to at his first hearing.
Mr. DeSantis, please identify the document that's on the screen in front of us.
This is a summary table of the total traffic volumes during the peak hour periods, the morning, the afternoon, and Saturday, that were recorded on all of the driveways in and out of the Plymouth Meeting Mall at various intervals, different years since 2005.
So take us through this chart, Mr. DeSantis.
Sure.
Mr. Kaplan, has this been marked as an exhibit previously?
No.
This is a new exhibit?
This is a new exhibit because yes, it's a new exhibit in response to the testimony given by Mr. Graham in both of the times that he testified.
What?
Any objection?
Yes.
Well, he hasn't moved for its admission.
Well, so
but-
fine. So I object to its presentation to the board. I mean, I don't understand what he's getting at. And again, the first night of testimony of my expert witness was, of course, handicapped by the failure of the applicant to turn over the evidence. I mean, there's no way ever to put it.
You know, it's enough with this failure to turn over the evidence. We
What do you mean? You
submitted,
failed to turn it over.
Peter, I sat in a Zoom hearing for 5 hours before a Philadelphia judge. And the one rule was that each person gets to finish his statement before the next. I'll be glad to let you finish whatever your statements are if you allow me to do the same thing. And if he doesn't, Dave, then order him to do it. I'm entitled to make my statements without getting cut off, particularly in this Zoom format.
So I object to this presentation.
He doesn't even know, wait a minute. I'm in the middle of making a presentation. He cuts me off and you're going to let him talk now without letting me make my presentation?
I let you finish.
I believe that he raised an objection wherein, as you know, we stop and we ask for the basis of the objection. And you sometimes have a chance to give your reasons why the objection shouldn't be sustained. And we make a ruling. So Mr. Amuso is objecting to a new exhibit. Mr. Amuso, what's the basis of your objection to this exhibit?
Basis of my objection is twofold. This is presenting new evidence. This isn't rebuttal. And to the extent he's rebutting evidence my expert testified on the first night, we said we weren't relying on that anymore, that now that we actually had the report, that we were analyzing the report, the numbers that were presented finally to us, not what we had to come up with in the absence of any other information. So he's incorrect on both counts.
So Mr. Amuso gets to put a witness on who concocted numbers using a 2005 study about today and interpolated a way that we have no idea and spent 2 hours telling this board what the level of service and what the amount of traffic is on Germantown Pike and the other surrounding intersections. We gave them our report and his statements were totally wrong. And we have the right to give the information. All of these reports that are here have been submitted to the township. All of them were with the township when Mr. Graham failed to ask for the information. They had the traffic study for weeks and weeks. And instead of asking for more information, they came in and they said, oh, we don't have any information. And then he concocted something. This is an exhibit that will show what the traffic is out on the surrounding roads in accordance with the traffic study. Let me ask my first question before you object.
Can I ask you a question? Is this exhibit prepared to rebut Mr. Graham's testimony the first time he testified before he had the full traffic report? Or is this designed to rebut his testimony that came after the second time he testified, that came after the full report was submitted?
The exhibits that I am going to present with Mr. DeSantis is to rebut both what he said the first time and what he said the second time.
The totality of his testimony, as it were.
Well, Dave, he
I'm
made,
asking you, Mr. Kaplan.
well, the totality,
Yeah,
he told us things about all of the intersections around the mall. He showed a simulation where he showed that there were only 2 lanes of traffic on Germantown Pike, when Preet had spent over $1 million to make it 3 lanes. He's been wrong so many times.
all right, but Mark, you're now testifying. Please,
Well,
you're testifying.
I
And every
can't-
time you say that Mr. Graham concocted evidence, that's really it's not right of you to do that. Let's stick
Well,
to,
okay,
no, just, that's just not right. And you're not, I don't think you're helping your client's cause by pontificating like that.
Well, you
If
asked me.
if this chart is designed to rebut Mr. Graham's testimony that was given after he had the full traffic report, then we're going to allow it, because I think the board wants to get to the bottom of the traffic situation out here.
Yeah,
But
okay.
if this
Well,
is, but when we originally asked you what this was, you said it was to rebut Mr. Graham's testimony made the first time he testified prior to him having the study, which isn't fair because he didn't have the full study. It wasn't marked as and put into evidence at that time. And between meetings, he got it. He had the chance to review it, and he continued his testimony.
Well, and my answer to you, and I hope this is satisfactory, this is to rebut both what he said before he got the report and after he got the report.
Okay.
And this will reflect exactly what the board wants to know. What's the traffic situation around the mall? Isn't that what we're here about?
Well, we're here about that, but you had the chance to put on Mr. DeSantis to tell the board what the traffic situation was around the mall. And Mr. Amuso called Mr. Graham to tell what he thought the traffic situation was around the mall. And
Well,
that's the case in chief. Again, if you're rebutting Mr. Graham's direct testimony about counts or volume or traffic flow or circulation, et cetera, let's stick to that. Let's move forward. And we're going to have to deal with, objections if they arise.
and I'll go forward, but I just want to make sure I understand one thing you're saying, Dave. Mr. Graham came on and testified the first time. You say, and Peter says he didn't have the entire report. I say he had the report that we submitted and waited and didn't ask for anything more, and then issued all types of statements about what the condition of the traffic around the mall is. We have the right to respond to that. He then had the report, and he still made statements that are subject to rebuttal. And that's what this is all about.
Let's rebut the statements he made after he had time to review the report and after he reviewed.
Can I respond? Let me know when.
Wait,
when you're
excuse
done.
me,
I'll
just
respond.
let me make one more statement, Peter, and then
I
I'll
will
be
respond.
quiet. I have asked Joe DeSantis to analyze the traffic and the history of the traffic in around the mall. You will remember that Mr. Graham, in his second testimony, said there were only 2 lanes of traffic. There were only 2 lanes of traffic each way. That's patently false, and it led to so many conclusions that are wrong.
That's
Rebut
not what he
that.
said, but we can.
Rebut that. If
We're
that's
gonna-
what his diagram showed and you cross-examined him on that and you want to rebut that with Mr. DeSantis, rebut that testimony.
So let me start. I haven't asked the
Let me
first
respond to
question
your
yet.
statement, all
Okay,
right?
let Mr. Amuso respond.
So I want to be very clear that Mr. Kaplan admitted that he never sent the full report. It's in the February transcript on page 127. He never sent the report. So when Mr. Graham testified the first night, he did not have the report. So that's in the transcript. It's black and white. They never turned it over. And look, it happens. People make mistakes. I'm not saying it's nefarious, but you can't make a mistake like that and then somehow try to take advantage of it and say, well, my expert, he used the wrong information when it's your case. Oh, sorry. It's the applicant's case. It's not the township's job or any objector's job to chase down evidence. We thought this is what they were standing on, so we responded to it. Turns out it's not what they were standing on. When they gave us what they were standing on, we responded to that. I agree. Anything that Mr. Graham said in the second night, and you have rebuttable factual testimony from Mr. DeSantis, that's fine. But to go
All right.
off on these tangents is not.
Let's move forward with this and see where we go.
Mr. DeSantis, how long have you been the traffic engineer for the Plymouth Meeting Mall?
We started working for Preet back in the mid 2000s when we were changing the uses on the mall for restaurant and other uses.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. It's when the uses, I guess you said along the mall, when the restaurants were introduced on the Hickory Road
Correct.
side.
Correct. When they introduced the restaurants on the Hickory Road side. Correct.
And did you prepare traffic reports back then and through the whole evolution of the mall?
Yes, we did a traffic study back in 2006 based on traffic volumes in 2005 that we counted, which I believe Mr. Graham used in his first analysis.
And when was that, and is that the first line on, I'd rather do it this way. Mr. DeSantis, did you then, what was the next time that you did a traffic study for the Plymouth Meeting Mall?
We counted the mall traffic again in 2013 after the Whole Foods renovation and the restaurants were installed for potential expansion of the mall. But that report was not submitted to the township. The next line is what was submitted. We did a traffic study for the after the Macy's was closed and for the repurposing of that Macy's for the uses that are in there now.
So in 2017, you did traffic counts when Macy's closed.
Correct.
And then when was the next study that you did for the mall?
So the fourth line was in that traffic study that we submitted to the township for the repurposing of the mall, and it indicated how much traffic we anticipated would be developed, would result with the repurposing of the mall. And those counts were reviewed by the township's traffic engineer because it related to an impact fee that the Preet did pay back in, when they got the approval for the repurposing. So in that same report, the fourth line were our future projections, 2019 projections for the mall.
And then that's so 2019. And then did you do a study after the Macy's was repurposed?
Yes, we did. That's the 2020 counts we did for the traffic study that was just reviewed by the township's traffic engineer. That's the report they have in hand. We did the counts in 2020, and that's this line here, and it reflects what were the actual counts on the driveways, and they are in the traffic study that they did receive.
And then what is the last line?
The last line is the projections in that traffic study of the total traffic volumes in and out of the mall with the 500 apartments added. And this line is also in the traffic study.
So could you take us back, and in 2005, when, or I'm sorry, I think it's a 2006 study. Could you walk us through this progression of what has gone on with the changes to the mall and the changes to the traffic counts?
I object. I'm not sure how's this a rebuttal? Seems to be some new testimony.
What?
How is this rebuttal, Mr. Kaplan?
How's it rebuttal? Mr. Graham testified early on saying to us that the current traffic counts are derived from a 2005 study on which he then interpolated and increased the traffic, told us that the traffic today is 35% higher than the traffic was back in 2005. That was incorrect, and I want to rebut it. In addition to which, he mischaracterized in his second testimony the improvements that have been made to the mall and the effect those improvements have on the mall. So this is a very simple historical representation of what the traffic counts were back when Mr. Graham decided to use 2005. And it's also, it will give the board, it will clear up what the board has been told about what has happened with the traffic on the mall. That's fair rebuttal.
So again, I object, as we talked about what Mr. Graham testified on the first night about using PennDOT multipliers to increase traffic. He did because he didn't have the report, as Mr. Kaplan admitted. Again, nothing nefarious, didn't have it. It's a mistake. It happens. So I object to any use of the rebuttal.
Let me hold on. Let me follow that up with a question. Did he then change that testimony regarding only using multipliers because he didn't have the full report after he received the full report and reviewed it? Did he then present different testimony that wasn't limited to the 2005 counts plus the multiplier?
I'm sort of asking
Mr. Amuso that.
Sure, yeah,
Sure.
no, the second night we made clear his testimony was based totally on the new numbers that we finally got from Preet. So I guess on this chart, it would be the 2020 actual driveway counts and the Preet projections of the mall counts of apartments. I think there was projections in there too of undeveloped till 2023. So his testimony was now based on that. And we said, we got it. We don't need to do the extrapolation now. We've gotten the numbers and that's what we're using.
Yeah, but the extrapolation was done and he was allowed to testify from it. And I objected to his methodology. And you can't put the genie back in the bottle, Dave. The board heard testimony about what the counts were in 2005 and since 2005, and he also misrepresented in his second testimony the improvements that have been made out on the property.
Right, and you said you're going to get to that. You said
Well, we're going to show those improvements, but along the way, while those improvements were made, there were events that took place that affected the traffic counts at the mall. And the board should understand the history of the mall, because we're here about a mall that has to be repurposed, that is suffering from the same thing that's happening to all malls.
Wow.
And-
Big objection, right?
Yeah, Mark, you're
Come
going a
on.
little far, a little bit far.
Right.
I understand all malls, but this is this mall, this is these intersections, these are these traffic counts.
Well,
Your
good.
report, your full report contained traffic counts. Right?
It contains a number of traffic counts.
Okay. That's the full report that we marked as an exhibit previously that the board has, and believe me, has reviewed. Mr. Amuso's client testified, Mr. Amuso's witness testified that in his opinion, there were different counts, or his expert opinion varied that there with what your witness testified to. Okay. I think that the board has the information it needs between your full report that contains these counts and Mr. Graham's testimony from the township that they can weigh the evidence and figure out what the actual counts and trips are. Okay. Now, if Mr. Graham, on his second testimony after the full report was made available, made assumptions that you take umbrage with regarding the number of lanes, regarding the uses that were contributing to the traffic, improvements that were made, et cetera, then that's to me is rebuttal. But taking Mr. Graham's first testimony of 2005 counts with the multiplier that he, after he got the full report, said, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. I'm using these numbers from the report and here's why I don't agree with them. And bringing back an exhibit and saying, well, here's what we think the truth is, I don't think is rebuttal.
Well,
I would ask you,
I am, David, I'm gonna lodge an objection, and I'm going to tell you that if and when this gets to an appeal, I'm gonna ask that the court
remand it.
no, not remand it,
Well,
and allow additional testimony, because you have prevented me, my client, from presenting relevant evidence. So
no,
there's no, that I'm just telling you what I'm going to say.
oh, I
You'll
know
make-
that, but
You'll
that's not,
make that argument before the judge.
but that's right. Listen, if I say that this exhibit's not coming in, and because it's repetitive, and because it's just taking numbers from the report that you're showing again, that you already showed in the report, then you make your objection to this being kept out. And if the court decides that it should have been in, they'll order a supplementation of the record.
So
I'd like to stick with rebuttal testimony from Mr. Graham, not pulling things out of your own report and saying, well, these are right and Mr. Graham was wrong.
well, you haven't even let me ask the question. I mean, it's obvious what's going on.
No, it's not
So-
obvious when
Well,
anything's going on.
It is. It is. So
right.
I would like to ask my questions of Mr. DeSantis.
Well, let me ask one question. The numbers on this exhibit, these numbers.
Let's do it the right way. Let me ask the questions of my witness.
No, I'm not going to let you do that right now until I get an answer to my question. And that is the numbers that appear on this exhibit. The weekday morning, the weekday afternoon, the Saturday midday, in, out, and total. All those numbers and the 9 columns that are on there with the footnotes and all that. Is that information that is already in your full traffic report that Mr. DeSantis submitted with this application?
I think there are multiple answers to that. Joe will have to answer that.
All right. Let's move on, Mr. Kaplan. We're not going to consider this.
Excuse me?
we're not going to consider this exhibit.
What,
Because it's
explain
not
that.
rebuttal testimony, Mr. Kaplan. It is testimony that's already been made by your client that was
No, no, it's
disagreed
not.
with,
No, it's not.
that was disagreed with by
Wait,
the
wait a
township's
minute.
expert, and now that you're bringing back to show why you think the township expert was wrong when the board already has this information.
Wait a minute. We haven't had testimony about what's in the current report after Mr. Graham testified.
Well, whose fault is that?
Yeah.
Well, whose fault is that?
Yeah.
Mr. Graham testified, and I have a right to rebut what he is saying.
Agreed.
And at a minimum, I have the right to rebut what the current traffic counts are and his characterization
For your
of them.
counts, though.
Yeah, they're your counts. These numbers came from the original report. It's already in evidence.
But it has not been explained. And Mr. Graham made a lot of statements about the counts. And I think that this board is entitled to understand what the current situation is.
That's what you presented in your case in chief. Mr. DeSantis wrote a report and he testified about it. I don't
Right.
know.
If you wanted to make these points, that was your case in chief. Just
Wow.
because you don't like what Mr. Graham said doesn't mean that you get a chance to come back and say why he was wrong.
Oh, yes, I do. That's exactly what rebuttal is.
No, rebuttal is something where if like you said, he didn't consider 3 lanes are going in one direction. He only showed 2 lanes. That's rebuttal. In his report, if he didn't take into consideration the fact that there are numerous additional uses generating traffic out there, and he didn't take them into consideration, and that's clear, that's rebuttal. But showing your own counts again is not rebuttal.
It is showing our counts again when he has characterized those counts, and when he, instead of taking all of our counts, picked and chose some of them and made characterizations. So I'm allowed to rebut that. So let me do this. Let me just get on the record. Let's look at the 2020 actual driveway counts so that when we get into talking about what Mr. Graham said, the board will have a context.
All right, we're going to take this question by question, and we're going to be careful what we do here. Okay. If talk about 2020 actual driveway counts, what Mr. Graham said and how that's rebuttal.
Well, we're going to.
Go ahead. You can proceed.
Mr. DeSantis, tell us about the 20. Did you and McMahon take actual counts on the peak hour driveway volumes for the Plymouth Meeting Mall in 2020?
Yes, we actually did the counts, I believe, I'm looking at it. Yes, February 2020.
And where are those counts depicted on this statement?
It's this line here, line 5, the actual total driveway counts you would find them on the manual turning moving counts in the report and on the figures in the report. This is a summary of all the ins and outs of all the driveways added together.
And Mr. Graham testified in his last testimony about certain ins and outs and make characterizations of what was in your report, did he not?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Now, does this do these 2020 counts show the total volume of traffic in and out of the mall in 2020 before any apartments are added?
Yes, that's line 5 is before the apartments are added.
And what is the total number of trips in and out of the mall on a total basis that you have all the way over on the right?
Well, again, these are broken into peak hour periods.
No. So go to where I'm asking you. What is the total number of trips that you've totaled over on the right, Mr. DeSantis?
This number here, 2464, that is the total on Saturday. The total, this is in is 1278, out is 1186. The total is 2464. That was the actual total on Saturday.
So is Saturday the highest volume day at the mall?
Saturday is typically the highest day for the retail, for any retail, and that is reflected here on this chart. The morning total is 652, the afternoon total is 1762, and then Saturday is typically the highest for any mall.
And did you have that same total count when you did the study in 2005?
2005, we count up all the driveways prior to any changes. It was primarily all retail, no changes in use. And the total was 2975 on Saturday.
So the total counts now, 15 or 16 years later, is 20 to 25% less than it was back in 2005. Is that correct?
I'm not sure the exact percentage, but yeah, it's 500 or so vehicles per hour less.
Okay.
I object. Did you hear me before?
No, I did not. Hold on. I did not hear you, Mr. Musso.
Sorry, but I might have been frozen. So I just object to this testimony about 2005 counts. I'm not sure how this is rebutting what Mr. Graham said. Again, his testimony was based on the numbers presented, for 2020 and the 2023 projections. I don't know what 2005 is.
It's historical evidence about the mall, and there have been multiple questions raised by the board.
Well, I object. Then again, it's rebuttal.
Peter, stop it. Let me finish.
Stop objecting.
We
have these conversations.
Mr. Musso, let Mr. Kaplan finish.
All right.
The history of the traffic at the mall is very relevant to this application. And it will become even more relevant when we show Mr. Graham's mischaracterization of the improvements. But you wanted me to limit the testimony. I have not gone through each one of the iterations at the mall. We've testified that the current counts are 2464. There is no reason in the world why we can't say what the counts were in 2005 when Mr. Graham testified from the same study. He chose to use that same study. It's in evidence, so we have the right to compare what we have now with what was in existence at the time that he used, that the counts were derived for his original study.
Understood, but I think that the board is sharp enough to understand that the 2005 counts that he used with the multiplier that you're now rebutting him on was testimony that he gave before he had the full study.
Yeah, but
if you want to rebut that, you can rebut it. But I think the board understands that Mr. Graham's testimony was changed somewhat after he had a chance to look at the full study and see what the most up-to-date counts were.
Yeah, but Dave, you're missing my point. Mr. Graham testified to what the counts were back in 2005 before he made his calculations. And we don't have a problem with that because he took it from our study.
So there's no reason why Joe can't say that the current counts are 2464 and back in 2005, they were 2975. That's 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 rebuttal. all in the record already.
How's that? What are you rebutting?
Well, it's fine. If you accept that, then we can move on.
Numbers are what they are. I think the board sees that. Let's move on.
Okay. And Joe, what is the last line on this chart? What does it do?
In the traffic study we just submitted, we projected what the total volumes would be, adding the traffic from the apartment building. So the total ins and outs are projected to be 819 total in the morning, 1,944 in the afternoon, and 2,647 vehicles per hour. This is all vehicles per hour. And during the highest hour of these periods, and on Saturday, it's 2,647 vehicles per hour. During the highest.
So that's how many additional total cars? 203?
On Saturday, it's about 180.
180. Thank you. Okay. Let's go on to, excuse me while I. So is it fair to conclude that even with 500 apartments, the total mall traffic will be less than the traffic in 2005 and 2006?
Objection, it's not rebuttal.
Yeah, that's in the record already, Mr. Kaplan.
Well, so if it's in the record, he
We'll
can
we'll
testify.
sustain that. We don't need Mr. DeSantis to testify to that again because it's already in the record. I don't think Mr. Graham testified that those numbers were any different than you're saying they are.
And you're telling me that I have an expert here, and you're going to exclude that expert from pointing out to this board the difference in the number of trips between 2005 and 2023.
It's already in the record, and he already had the opportunity to do that in your case in chief.
Okay.
And that's basic math, not expert testimony.
Okay. Now let's go on to your exhibits with regard to the Germantown Pike improvements.
Is this also a new exhibit, Mr. Kaplan? Or did we mark this one previously?
This is a new exhibit. It is intended to rebut Mr. Graham's incorrect testimony about the existing conditions and the prior conditions of Germantown Pike.
Okay.
Mr. DeSantis, tell us what this drawing is that, or not drawing, but this aerial photograph that you're showing here.
This is a photo of Germantown Pike pre-2010, when the road was actually widened. And it shows that Germantown Pike was 2 lanes northbound all the way through to Hickory with turning lane, a right turn lane at the different intersections, but it was 2 through lanes in the, I'll say, northbound, westbound direction. And then in the southbound, eastbound direction, it was also 2 lanes, particularly through the Lawn Fall intersection, was 2 lanes before it was widened out at Plymouth Road. Also, there were only 2 lanes on the mall access coming out. So this was prior to any changes that Preet did to Germantown Pike.
Now, let me ask you, there were other would you describe the right out at the western end of the mall?
Yes, this driveway was configured as a right out only. There was no
Objection. I don't have
entrance into the driveway.
Objection. I don't think we testified about that.
You testified that there were 2 lanes on Germantown Pike
I don't.
in the present circumstance,
We did not.
and we have the right to rebut that.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
you
so what does the
mischaracterized.
right out have to do with that?
Well, Mr. Graham characterized the traffic that would go into the right in only coming from the east to the west. He characterized what would happen at the Lawn Fall Mall entrance. He characterized, he testified about where the traffic would go that got past the right in, right out only. And so we're here to show the board how wrong he was in his testimony. So I would ask that Joe, bring up your next drawing and tell us what it is.
So this is actually the construction plan to show what Preet actually did. This was approved by PennDOT and Preet paid all of the cost. Again, it was to widen the roadway to 3 lanes through, relocate the median, all this.
Joe, slow down. Walk us through this from east to west, please.
I
Sure.
object. My expert never said that Germantown Pike was 2 lanes.
Yes, he did.
Well, I'll get that on my rebuttal. So go ahead.
Okay, that's for rebuttal.
So this depicts what PennDOT approved, which was widening along the mall frontage, basically moving the 2 lanes over so that we could move the median over, which is green, and then add an additional lane, which is this faded yellow. That's all another lane. So now that leads to what it looks like today. And that's what I want to show. Let me go back. This also shows how the driveway was modified. It was a right out only. It's now a right in, right out. And the main driveway was widened by widening on the inbound side to create 3 lanes coming out. So that was all part of the work they did in 2010. And then this is an aerial of what Germantown Pike
Do me a
looks.
favor, walk us through this slowly. No, the aerial of what it is now. Please, go ahead.
So what it is now is coming from Plymouth Road. It's 3 lanes coming up Plymouth Road. And it continues as 3 lanes. Oh, let me get rid of that. Sorry. Okay. Continues as 3 lanes all the way through up to Hickory.
So the 3rd lane does not drop off at the main intersection, does it?
No, it does not. It is
Objection. Nobody ever said it did.
Well, that's a rebuttal.
All right, sorry.
shown a little bit bigger. So it's 3 lanes in each direction today. And here's the right in, right out over here. And then here's the 3 lanes coming out. And again, Preet did all this back in 2010.
What exhibit is this?
Well, we'll have to number these exhibits. David, could you help me on numbering the exhibit? I had the chart.
No, because I don't know how many we've had tonight that weren't marked.
Okay.
And
Jessica, are you there?
I think the last applicant's exhibit was A14.
So A15 would be the chart that Joe testified about. A15, A16 would be the aerial photograph of what Germantown Pike looked like before the improvements were made. And I guess A16 is,
A17.
so I'm sorry, 17 is this aerial photograph of the current configuration.
Wait a second, there was one in between. It was the plans.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So those plans, I guess that's A
17.
17, and the aerial photograph is A 18.
So Mark, what I mentioned in my original testimony, if I can repeat that, is basically what I told
No,
you.
you can't repeat it.
Okay,
Objection.
that's I wasn't sure. Okay.
Okay. So is it fair to say, Mr. DeSantis, that Preet added all of these traffic improvements between 2010 and now, and that the volumes in and out of the mall have decreased?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Now, you have, Mr. Graham testified that the introduction of the apartment project will, in his opinion, have a negative effect on the transportation network around the mall. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
And have you prepared, would you bring up the next exhibit and would you identify it?
This is an exhibit which indicates the amount of traffic that the apartments would add relative to the amount of traffic that currently is on Germantown Pike.
Okay, let me stop you so that we're very specific for the record. This is a bar chart, is it not?
Yes.
And over on the left, it is entitled, go down to the bottom, weekday morning. I guess that's weekday morning traffic.
Right.
And going up that chart, it says, could you blow it up a little bit? That's good, thank you. So it says in the column on the left, what is the through traffic in the weekday morning?
There are currently 4,444 vehicles per hour in both directions on Germantown Pike at the location that these counts were made, which is in between Plymouth Road and the right turn into the Plymouth Meeting Mall. So
And that total 4,444 vehicles is composed of what, Mr. DeSantis?
it's composed of just the total two-way traffic on Germantown Pike. But we were able to isolate how much of the traffic was mall traffic, which is 457, and how much is through traffic, which was 3,987.
So in the current weekday peak hour in the morning, there are 4,400
I'm gonna object. Is this new information? I mean, is there a report about how you isolated things? I don't see.
Well, yeah, my question, Mr. Kaplan, is how is this rebuttal? What did Mr. Graham testify to that you're rebutting?
Mr. Graham testified that the introduction of the apartments, in his opinion, would have a significant negative impact on the traffic on Germantown Pike and all of the intersections to which he testified to.
Okay.
So this is rebuttal to that. And I'd like to continue.
Well, I know you would.
Is it rebutting?
But this material, this data and this material were available to you when you did your case in chief. And in fact is probably in the record, just maybe not in this format. And Mr. Graham disagreed with that and gave a an expert opinion that this would have a significant adverse impact on the traffic in and around the mall area. Seems like you've gone back and just prepared another exhibit that is showing the impact of the apartment traffic in a different way, using
Well,
the existing numbers that were in the record.
What I have asked Joe to do, in light of Mr. Graham's opinion about how negative the effect our traffic will have, is to show to the board what the existing traffic is, what part of it is through traffic that has nothing to do with the mall, the part of the traffic that is mall traffic, and then to show to the board how small the additional traffic from the apartments will be. And that is in rebuttal to Mr. Graham's opinion that the traffic from the apartments will have a significant negative impact upon the traffic in the area. And any opinion has got to be based on facts. And in order to rebut Mr. Graham's statements, I have asked Joe to prepare this exhibit, which is in direct rebuttal to what Mr. Graham said. So I would like to continue so that we can show to the board that Mr. Graham's opinion was not based on facts.
It's not really, rebuttal is, Mr. Graham, you have a problem with the facts that he presented. Not that, I mean, clearly Mr. DeSantis.
I can't hear you, Peter.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I don't know, something must have happened. I heard you before.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Peter.
Can you
I
hear
don't know
me?
what the,
Can you hear me?
Peter, if you get closer to the computer, maybe, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think that's, can you hear me? See me?
Yes, we can
Okay.
hear you.
All right. So my objection to this is that, rebuttal is about the facts that Mr. Graham presented. So if there's something wrong with the numbers that Mr. Graham presented, Mr. DeSantis can say, well, look, he miscalculated that, or he did this. But this is like a new report. I mean, I get it. Mr. DeSantis thinks that it doesn't have a significant impact to traffic, and my expert says it does have a significant impact to traffic. But this is not proper rebuttal.
Yeah,
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. That my expert is going to say that it won't, and my expert's opinion has to be on science and facts. And these are the facts on which Mr. DeSantis bases his opinion.
And all of these facts were in the record when Mr. DeSantis first testified, and this chart was not shown, was not prepared at that time. And I don't think it's appropriate to prepare a chart like this based on evidence that's already in the record, just because it puts a different spin on Mr. DeSantis's testimony that, in his opinion, there is no major significant impact on traffic around the mall. He already testified to that.
No, he didn't.
Mark, this is the second bite of the apple.
Dave, I don't know what you're doing.
Let's move on.
What you're doing.
I know what I'm doing. Let's move on.
Now, Mr. DeSantis, in the weekday morning peak hour, how many cars presently travel through Germantown Pike?
Again, are we going over this chart? I thought we weren't considering this chart.
Yeah.
You don't have to look at the chart.
Well, then let's take it down. But again, I'm not, what is he rebutting that my witness said?
He's rebutting that your witness testified that the addition of apartments would have a negative impact upon the traffic on Germantown Pike. And I have the right to have Mr. DeSantis, whether you use this chart or we just have testimony, testify to what percentage of the overall traffic is represented by the apartments. I certainly have the right to do that, Mr. Sander.
Well, but
I don't think,
But
I
you-
object.
the-
Rebuttal is,
Mr. Kaplan, you had, all these numbers were available, the 4444 and the 4543, that difference in the traffic generated. That was from your, Mr. DeSantis's original report, the full-blown report.
Well, I
It's
don't know that
it's
it
in there.
was.
You're using this opportunity to take it out of there and present it in a different way to support Mr. DeSantis's original opinion, which hasn't changed.
No, Mr. DeSantis did not give this opinion because
But
he didn't have to, excuse me.
he
He
had the
didn't
chance.
have
He
to
doesn't get a chance.
rebut the opinion of Mr. Graham.
But it's your burden, it's your client's burden.
My client's burden is not to anticipate
Sure
what
it is.
another expert will say
Well,
and anticipate what he's going to say. My right is to then present facts that discredit the opinion of Mr. Graham. And the facts that I want to present here is that the apartments are only 2%.
we know
of the
that, but
traffic.
I'm not going to let you testify. I'm not going to let you testify. I know what you're going to ultimately want to say from this chart, but I'm not going to let you review it and put it in the record because we haven't decided this issue.
Forget the chart. I'm going to ask Mr. DeSantis,
All right, well, take the chart down, and
we object to your rejecting this chart.
noted.
Mr. DeSantis, so tell us, based on your traffic study, how many cars pass through the Germantown Pike area in front of the mall at the present time on
Yeah,
the
can we
weekday
take it down?
mornings?
Can we take this down?
Is that okay?
Go ahead,
We're going to stop sharing.
Joe.
Yes.
Did you hear my question?
Want to know how much is, you have to say it one more time.
Tell us the total trips at the present time on Germantown Pike in front of the mall on the weekday.
All right, and now, look, I object to this chart.
Take
It's been
the
rolled
chart
about 10
down,
times.
Joe.
But just stop sharing, all right? Just
Take the chart down. But no, Mr. Amuso doesn't tell you when to stop sharing what. What I want you to tell me is what are the total number of weekday morning trips presently on Germantown Pike in front of the mall.
All right, and I object unless you're telling me Mr. Graham gave an incorrect number for that. We
Mr.
use your
Kaplan,
number.
do the number of vehicles that you're asking Mr. DeSantis to testify about that are proposed to be part of the apartment due to the apartments versus the existing pass-through plus mall traffic, are those where did those numbers come from? They're in the original report, correct?
I don't know.
Well,
I can't tell you.
Then I can't let you put on a new and different case.
Joe, where do those numbers come from? Are the current numbers in the traffic report?
These numbers are, they're in the figures in the traffic report.
Okay. And do you also, in the traffic report, do you show what the additional traffic will be from the apartments?
In the traffic report, yes, there's a figure that depicts what the apartment traffic would be.
And what percentage then of the overall traffic will the apartments be?
Again, I object unless you tell me Mr. Graham gave incorrect information.
No, Mr. Graham made a conclusory opinion that the introduction of the apartments will have a negative effect on the traffic along Germantown Pike. And
Based
Mr.
on
Des-
his testimony,
What?
based on Mr. Graham's testimony that preceded that opinion. You
No.
cross-examined him on that. You cross-examined him on that.
And so are
We'll
you
take a
telling me,
second question.
David, are you telling me that if a witness gets on, an expert gets on, I don't have the right to rebut that witness's expert testimony, expert
No,
opinion?
I'm not telling you that, Mr. Kaplan. We allowed you to talk about the lanes and the revised uses and the turns that Mr. Graham testified to that you dispute. Now you're just pulling numbers out of your own report, putting them in a different format and
No, I'm not.
regurgitating them to the board. Yes,
No, I'm
yes, you
not.
are. Yeah,
I am using-
in my opinion, in my
I-
humble
I
opinion,
am-
you are.
No, I am presenting the testimony by which Mr. DeSantis will refute that the addition of the apartments will have a negative impact. He will refute that opinion. That's exactly what rebuttal expert testimony is all about.
But if you had the chance to do this on your case in direct before Mr. Graham even testified and you didn't do it, you're getting a second bite of the apple now.
No,
You're presenting your case again.
that's not true. I didn't know that Mr. Graham was going to come in here and tell us that with such an additional small percentage of traffic that would be added, that there would be such a negative impact.
Okay, so don't take Mr. DeSantis through what the percentages are because the percentages are the same. I mean,
No, they're
that's
not.
not,
We don't
that's
know what
not
Mr.
rebuttal. The percentages haven't changed. Mr. Graham's testimony that X number of vehicles will be due to the apartments hasn't changed.
He
Their
didn't testify to that.
Their opinions as to whether it's a significant adverse impact on the traffic are different.
No, Mr. Graham did not testify, did not tell us that his opinion was based on the number of additional trips that will be generated by the apartments. He did not testify to that. He testified that he thought that we recount,
Oh, Peter, hold on. Let Mr. Kaplan finish.
if we go back to the testimony, I cross-examined him and he told us that his opinion was based on the fact that Joe DeSantis miscalculated the number of cars that would be going to the apartments that would go through the right in, right out, that was wrong. He never dealt with the numbers of additional trips. So my witness is allowed to come here and say that Mr. Graham is wrong, and here is my scientific basis for why he was wrong. And the scientific basis is that a number of trips that will be generated by the apartments are very, very small in relation to the overall trips. Mr. Graham never dealt with that issue.
Well, okay, so A, that's why you're not rebutting it. But B, I mean, it's about what did my guy say that was wrong about, like you just said, something about turning lanes or something, or the fact that Mr. DeSantis didn't take something into account. Mr. DeSantis says, no, I did take into account, and here's where it is in the report. Okay, but it just seems like Mr. DeSantis just has a different professional conclusion than my guy, but he had that opportunity to present that in your case in chief.
No, you can't refute somebody's opinion until you hear what that
I
opinion
agree,
is.
Mr. Kaplan, I agree with you. I agree that he has the right to rebut, and we've allowed a good amount of rebuttal testimony here.
No, you've cut me off every time.
No, I have not.
Yes,
No,
you
I-
have.
I'm sorry. What about the aerial photographs and the photograph of the plan and how many lanes are going where and what
Well,
improvements
you
are in
didn't
place?
have
All
any-
of that's in the record, and you weren't cut off at all about that.
You didn't have any choice because Graham got up there and said that there were 2 lanes of
Don't
traffic.
testify, Mark. Don't
What?
testify. And we allowed it because it was legitimate rebuttal. It's
Well,
legitimate
so is
rebuttal.
this legitimate.
Well, of course you're gonna, that's your opinion. That's your opinion. I
Well,
don't.
that's what that's right. And Mr. DeSantis has the right to rebut it and say why he's rebutting it. And you're stifling him.
I'm stifling him because this is information that was already in the record, in the report, and is now being taken out, put in a different form, and
Forget
shown to the
about the
board
form.
again, not to
Forget about-
rebut, but to prove your case in chief.
No, to rebut. Forget the form. The testimony is that there's only 2% of additional traffic. Mr. DeSantis,
Testimony.
tell us this. What's the additional percentage of traffic that will be introduced to Germantown Pike based on the introduction of the apartments?
And I object. That's not rebutting anything. my witness-
Sustained.
The additional.
Are you serious?
Hey, you can't answer, Mr. DeSantis.
I'm sorry.
Are you serious? Are you really serious? Mr. DeSantis, did you hear Mr. Graham's testimony where he opined that the introduction of the apartments will have a significant negative impact on the traffic on Germantown Pike?
I object for the same reasons I've been objecting all along.
Overruled.
Yes, I did hear.
Do you agree
Yes,
with that do you agree with that opinion?
No, I do not.
Tell us why you disagree with that opinion.
I object unless he's going to say based on what Mr. Graham said in his.
Overruled.
Well, based on our analysis, number one, but I do disagree with what he said. If I may, for someone to come to the conclusion that adding one additional car for a signal cycle, in addition, and adding a queue of one car, of one car or 2 cars on a roadway such as Germantown Pike on a signal cycle, to say that that's a significant impact is, to me, I'm not sure the word, it's ridiculous, because there's so much traffic on Germantown Pike. The addition of one more car, a signal cycle, is meaningless. So I disagree completely with what his conclusion. I don't know how he reached that with the addition of one car per cycle on various approaches.
Did you hear Mr. Graham testify that it was his opinion that you miscalculated the number of cars that would turn into the right turn lane at Luke Oil, and therefore underestimated the number of cars that were going to the apartments that would go to the main entrance and make a right turn in? Did you hear that?
Yes, I heard that too.
And do you agree with that opinion?
Again, that's a ridiculous statement. There was the capacity for the right turn at the traffic signal is significantly high. We could have easily assigned traffic to that right turn and it would have been fine, but it would have been unrealistic. There's no reason apartment traffic would go up to Lawnfall to turn right to come back when they could simply turn right into the right in. So we assign the traffic to where it's going to go. It's ridiculous that he made some type of issue about how we assign the traffic.
Do you recall when you were here and you were questioned by a number of members of the zoning hearing board on how the circulation, how cars would be able to make a right turn into the Luke Oil entrance in light of the current situation, the current configuration? Do
I
you
object
remember
to the question.
Mr. Abril asking you that question a number of times?
So I object to this question. As we've talked about, the witness had a chance to answer the board questions at the time, and this is not rebuttal. We're now away from Mr. Graham.
Right, well, we're going to overrule it and we're going to allow it.
Do you remember that question, Mr. DeSantis?
Yes, yes, I did.
Have you prepared materials to respond to Mr. Abril's questioning you about how the cars would be able to maneuver into that intersection?
Yes,
I object to introduction of any of these new materials.
Would you please bring up the drawings that you prepared to
I
show
object.
how that entrance would work with the
object.
addition of apartments?
I object. Can you hear me?
You know what, guys, I got to tell you, I need a session with the zoning hearing board members alone.
Okay.
Dave Conroy, I'm not sure how that works, but I have to, we need, and Brandon can help you. I need to discuss this with the board.
Dave,
in
before you
executive session.
discuss it, David, before you discuss it with the board, I'd like you to give me a couple of minutes because I'd like to show you, point you to the questions that were asked by board members of my witnesses when they were not even on the stand.
I object to all of this. I mean, I don't object
Where'd
to
you
you
go,
talking to
Mark?
the board, of course. That's whatever
Where'd you go, Mark?
Me?
They are.
I can't hear you.
No, I said, where did you go?
I went to pick up my notes. So if you're going to have a session, and I think you should, I want to refresh you and the board to the questions that were asked
Okay.
in the
If they asked me to
middle,
do that, Mark,
not during my case. But
I understand. I
It was
understand.
not during my
Yes,
case.
it was.
I understand.
By agreement, it was.
I understand. Before you do that, Mr. Captain, let me talk to them in general. And if we need a list of the questions that they asked and you've taken them from the record and you're representing as counsel that those are from the record and questions that were asked, let me talk to the zoning hearing board first and we'll
Okay,
let you know
but
if we need that.
give me 2 seconds before you do that. The
Okay,
questions,
not to read questions,
pardon me?
not to read questions.
No, I'm not going to read the
Okay.
questions. I
Okay.
just want to give you what we heard. We heard this board asking questions, Mr. Abril
Well,
specifically.
and you're about to read questions. I don't want you to do
No, I'm
that.
not going to read them.
I don't want you to do that. You know what? We're going off. Let's go off the record. Off the record. I need to talk to the zoning hearing board in executive session. Dave Conroy, can you arrange that, please?
Brandon, are you able to just keep in the members that we had in executive session before the meeting tonight?
Maybe do a breakout room. I mean, not to tell you what. to do.
Yeah, however you have to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do breakout rooms.
We can all sign off and sign back on in, 10 minutes or something. Use a bathroom break anyway.
Or yeah,
You know, I had this happen in court today. I'm trying to think how they did it. I can't tell you.
Can he send us all a separate link and we'll join a separate session?
Yeah,
that
I think
possible,
you're
Brandon?
right, Dave. I think that's the way you have to do it. There's some way to do a breakout here, but I understand if Dave doesn't know how to do it.
Well, I don't know how to do it, sir. I could find out, but I don't want to waste your guys' time.
Well, Brandon, can you send us a new Zoom link for the ZHB members only, please? And Mr. Conroy and myself.
Yes, well, this meeting will have to be suspended because it has to close to start a new one. So people are gonna have to reach.
Whatever it takes.
Okay, 1 second, please.
As long as everybody participating in this meeting can have access to get back into this meeting.
Yeah, you just have to use the prior link.
You just send us an
Okay,
email when
okay.
it's ready.
You're going to use the prior link. Okay. Yeah, let's it's 8:51. I'd say it might take it could take until maybe 9:10 to sort through this. So why don't we ask everybody to log back in at 9:10 on the same link, and we'll end this meeting now, and we will send out a new link for just the zoning hearing board members and myself and Mr. Conroy.
You want us to log off, or you're going to have
I
just?
believe that's what Mr. Strong asked that you do, because you got to close this one down before we start another one.
Oh, okay.
We'll log
But at
back in.
9:10, it'll be the same login.
Okay.
Are you good, Brandon, with all that?
Yeah, I'm just getting this meeting set up. I'm
All right.
sending it just to the ZHB.
5 ZHB members, myself and Dave Conroy. Okay, I think we're all here. Board members all back. Council, including Mr. Gundlach. Mr. Gundlach with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Okay, time is now 9:13. Let's go back on the record. I have discussed the matter with the zoning hearing board in executive session, and the board would like to hear the answers to questions that it posed. It believes that whether it had the opportunity to hear those answers before, there are questions that still remain, and the board agrees that Mr. Kaplan should proceed with his testimony. If Mr. Amuso objects to that, we will note that for the record, but we do want to proceed. The board did ask me to try to streamline this and stick to rebuttal testimony as best we can, and or answering of questions but that the board had. And we need to get through this, guys, and it's been messy tonight. So by all means, let's try to just move it forward and proceed with rebuttal testimony.
Okay.
Hold on.
Mr. Amuso.
Thanks. So I do object, and I
Okay.
appreciate you noting that for the record. I'd ask the township be extended the same courtesy to review the questions that the members asked of my witnesses, and we'll also prepare additional information and responses.
I discussed that possibility with the zoning hearing board, and the zoning hearing board was open to that.
I have no objection to that, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan.
I have other witnesses to respond to some of the other questions, but let me concentrate on Joe DeSantis's testimony. Some of what I will now ask him to present is in answer to the board's questions, and some of it is in response to Mr. Graham. So Joe DeSantis, I'm looking for you up there. There you are over on the right. So do you recall Mr. Graham presenting an exhibit that was characterized, I think, as a simulation or a picture of the traffic with little cars on Germantown Pike and on Lawnfall and on the entrance to the mall. Do you remember that?
Yes, yes, I do.
And do you agree with the conclusions that Mr. Graham gathered or told us as a result of his preparation of that simulation?
Well, again, I don't agree that the addition of, one car or two cars on a signal cycle, when there's probably 80 cars going through the intersection, doing a signal cycle, is this, I do not agree that's a significant.
And at my request, did you prepare a simulation of the traffic in front of along Germantown Pike from one end of the mall to the other in response to Mr. Graham's statements?
Yes, whereas Mr. Graham prepared a static picture, we actually prepared a moving simulation so that the board could actually see how the traffic flows.
Okay, well, I would ask you to bring up that simulation. In fact, I think that simulation is in 3 or 4 pieces. And would you bring up that simulation and would you take us through that simulation and would you explain, first of all, before you do the simulation, just explain to the board the software that you are using?
Sure. What the analysis that we did was utilized Synchro, which was prepared by Trafficware, and it's modeled after the Federal Highway Administration highway capacity manual methodology. So Synchro gives you the overall average conditions for an intersection based on the signal timings and things like that. Sim Traffic is kind of a micro picture of the Synchro results to kind of give you an idea of how a signal cycle might look. So the simulation is built on the Synchro analysis, and it just depicts how an individual cycle might look. So this is the simulation of the Synchro analysis that was in the report. And we just isolated the afternoon peak hour for a few minutes here, just to give you an idea.
So can you come closer? Dave, is Joe's a little broken up, or is that just me?
I think I could hear him fine.
Okay, then it must be me. Go ahead, Joe, I'm sorry. So explain what you are showing here.
So this is the afternoon peak hour, and it's showing how, when the traffic light turns red, the traffic queues up, and then it lets Lawnfall go first, and then it lets traffic come out of the mall. And then the traffic queues up, which it does every cycle, and then it turns green and it releases. So it's kind of unfair when he shows a single picture of everything being queued up without really showing you how it truly operates. So that's what this is, again, just to show the board that the Synchro results indicate that the overall level of service here is level service C. It's an average. It gives you good results because overall it's fine. There are individual movements that have high delay, but the overall average is good level of service. And the addition of the apartments adds little to the overall congestion or delay.
Let me stop you for 1 minute. In your, I was going to say in your opinion, but factually, we are seeing two lanes, two travel. We see traffic heading north and south, or in my way, east and west, and they're traveling through 3 lanes of through traffic and also a left turn lane. Is that an accurate representation of what is out there on Germantown Pike today?
Yes, this is configured accurately where it is 3 through lanes through the Lawn Fall intersection in each direction. The right lane is not designated for right turns only, as I believe Mr. Graham mentioned. It's 3 through lanes. You can turn right from this lane though, from the right lane, but you also go through.
So Mr. Graham gave us an opinion that was based in part on his determination in that static drawing that he said that there was a negative impact on the Lawn Fall, Germantown, Lawn Fall, Plymouth Meeting Mall entrance. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
No, I do not.
So walk us through what is the existing condition and the condition that you have proposed with regard to a change to the internal intersection of the ring road and the entrance to the mall.
Certainly. As you can see on the simulation, the current condition is the internal intersection. You're permitted to turn left and right. And what that tends to do is hold up the circulation aisle traffic. And yes, during peak times, it blocks the driveway. Here's the Shake Shack. Here's the driveway to the Shake Shack. And yes, it does block that. It eventually does clear out, but one of the reasons it gets backed up is because of the activity at this intersection delays the traffic from filling up the throat here. So what
more specific when you say the activity at that intersection? Show us what cars are coming in that slows up that left turn clean out.
Right there, that car that just turned left is holding up the traffic because they have to wait for anybody who comes in. Now here comes some more cars. These cars have to wait to see what are these cars going to do. Are they going to turn left? Are they going to turn right?
Joe, slow down. When you say these cars,
okay,
you have to talk about the cars coming into the throat and the ones in the queue on the internal road.
Right, and the ones on the queue in the internal road have the stop sign. So they have to wait to see, and the traffic that's flowing in has the right of way. So the traffic on the circulation aisle has to wait when traffic starts coming in. The circulation aisle has to wait until the traffic that comes in makes their movement. And it tends to hold up traffic on the circulation aisle such that they hesitate before turning into the throat. So what we're proposing is, let me bring up the next. So our recommendation is to basically channelize the entranceway so that you have to turn right when you come into the mall. You can't make a decision of left or right. What this does is eliminates some confusion for the drivers on the circulation aisle. They don't need to wait for traffic to come in. They can simply fill up this queue once it empties out. And you'll see that happen in the next, see the light turns red and traffic starts queuing up on Germantown Pike. This lets out, but now these vehicles on the circulation road, flow much more steadily because they don't have to worry about traffic coming in and deciding, are they turning left or right? they can just keep flowing and fill up. So what it does is it reduces the queue on the circulation aisle. We're not going to say it's never going to block this driveway, but the frequency of it blocking this driveway will be less with this new configuration. And this whole area, based on the synchro analysis, will work better under this configuration. And that's what we're proposing to do.
Now, you're also proposing an improvement to what I've been calling the Luke Oil intersection. And would you show us what that is and then run the simulation?
Right. Right now, this is a simulation of how the driveway works. It's basically a right-hand turn. Let me just advance so here's the simulation. So here the traffic was just released from Plymouth Road. They're coming up. And as I believe Dominic and others have said, yes, they slow down to turn right. But remember, there's no impediment to turning right. So there's a lot of capacity. There's a lot of traffic that can flow right in there. But yeah, they do slow up, and some of the traffic behind them have to slow up. So our recommendation, if I can do this quick enough, let me stop share and then share again, is to modify this kind of hard right turn to make it more of a tapered entrance.
Joe, slow up for a minute. Go slow, and using the green, show how that turn would be made now.
Okay, so here's the Luke Oil. Here's the driveways to the Luke Oil. Here's the lane going by. Right now, people are turning, this green area is basically where the driveway is today. And basically they come up and turn into this straight road. Our suggestion is to put a taper for traffic to exit Germantown Pike at a slightly more speed. They still have to slow up, but not like they do to make a hard right, so they can get off the road and then go into a curb. And this is a schematic. We'll look at these radiuses and all that, but we'd like to get them off the road, at a quick speed. And then as they come around the curve, our recommendation is to put in delineators to make sure there's no crossing of traffic until they get into the site further. And we can extend these delineators a little further if we need to. But the bottom line is having them come in off of Germantown Pike at a comfortable speed and get into their lane at a comfortable speed without worrying about traffic coming around the curve, so that this whole area, cleans up a little bit better. And then, with that, then we did a simulation that actually depicts that. Let me again go back to share. Go back to the simulation. So the simulation, and again, this is a simulation, but it gives you an idea of what we're talking about, how the traffic can get out of the way and then go into the curve, as opposed to slowing up and turning hard right. So we think this, again, we'll look hard at the geometry and again, look at the speeds coming off to improve this. But you can see what the simulation is showing. When the light is red at Plymouth Road, there's nobody coming. And then when the traffic is released at Plymouth Road, or they turn right from Plymouth Road, they show up and they turn in. And then for a period of time, there's no traffic until the next group of cars come, which is either from Plymouth Road turning on or coming straight from Germantown Pike up from Plymouth Road. But again, the thought behind the improvement is to get I'll give an area for the traffic to move off of Germantown Pike comfortably before they begin their turn. And so those are the improvements that we're recommending, for the entranceway. And then we have other improvements around the site if you want to move to that
Would you do that, please?
So let me go back to your screen. So again, this reflects the recommendations we're making. Again, the channelizing the traffic coming in. And the one thing about this, the reason we could actually do this is because had previously created this right in, right out driveway. So anybody who currently comes in and turns left will simply continue straight through and turn right in at this other driveway. So we don't need to keep this left turn at this driveway. And the other traffic that comes in this way and turns left again can easily go in off of Hickory Road. They don't need to come down here and turn left and then go back up towards Hickory Road. So that's why we can do this. And then here's the improvement for the right in that we're suggesting. And then the other improvements that we were.
Wait a minute, Joe, you were making, go back up. You were making some change where you've got the red line next to the right in. No, the other way. Come the other way. Come south.
South.
Yeah, I think you were yes, right there. What were you doing there?
Well, again, this is a wide area and traffic does come around this curve fairly quickly. And there is some converging in this area. Let me blow that up a little bit. That we're trying to address by delineating the traffic lanes a little bit tighter, a little bit better, and move them away from this area so that as they come around the curve, they're straighter. And then we have some delineators that we're recommending so that the traffic as they come around stay in their lane. As the traffic comes in on the right side, stays in its lane, and then they do their weaving, which is this section is where they weave if they're going to turn left to go towards the Dicks or Marshalls, and if they're going to go straight, they get in the right lane and go straight. So that was the improvement we're recommending around this curve. And then the other issue is the alignment between the through traffic here and the left turn laning traffic here. Currently they're almost head on. So we want to move the through traffic over so there's no more head on type of approaches.
Wait a minute, Joe, just come back there for a minute. So you described it fine, but for purposes of the record, would you describe where this intersection that you're now talking about is located?
This is the internal T intersection to the, I guess that would be to the south of the, show you what's up there. Okay, where the Miller's Owl House is, this would be the internal intersection.
So if you're coming along the internal road from the main intersection and you've come in and you've made that right, and then you come around and you make a left and you're coming down the hill towards the Whole Foods, before you get there, there's an intersection. Is
Correct.
that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Intersection that you're now talking about. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Now what happens next?
So then as you continue along the circulation aisle, there is some confusion as to what happens in terms of circulation. And today, the circulation aisle actually takes you directly kind of into the old IKEA property, and you have to know to turn left to continue along the circulation aisle. Our recommendation is to reconfigure the circulation aisle so that it's clear that you should travel around the bend and travel in between the Whole Foods and the proposed apartment building.
Stop. So you could come along the Whole Foods, go along, and there's an underground parking lot there for the Whole Foods, isn't there?
Correct. Yes, and that'll give you access to, here's the in to the parking garage and here's the out. And then-
Okay, so that takes care of if you're coming through this new configuration to go to the Whole Foods market. Now show us with regard, and do this slowly because you've got a lot of lines on top of each other. Well, how about coming to the apartments?
So come to the apartments, you follow the circulation road, but then you would actually, make a deliberate right turn to go into the parking for the apartments. So you won't, today you would kind of just flow into it. Now you have to make a deliberate right turn to go into the apartments. Then as you continue straight, this is a circulation aisle for the pickup and drop off, which we do not expect a lot of traffic, but it's a one-way flow to travel through here and drop off and then continue on. So that's where the apartment pickup and drop off is. And then
Wait,
continue-
finish that. Go up above where you got that red there. Now, who's going to go there?
So what we're proposing here is to improve this radius and segregate the lefts from the rights and have better signing to show that the circulation aisle is intended to go around and behind the movie theater as opposed to.
Stop there for 1 minute. So what you just showed, go back, blow that up again. So the traffic coming out of the underground parking lot at the Whole Foods could come out
Right.
and go and make a right turn where you are.
You make a right,
No, you could make a right, but you could also make a left
left.
and go there. And then where would that go?
And then we would sign them for the exit would be to follow, turn right, improve the radius. So they go to the right and then travel around the back of the movie theater and then follow this pathway up to Hickory.
Okay, now, so we would add a real access way or exit way for Whole Foods. And what about the cars coming out of the apartments? Where will they come out of the apartments, Joe?
Right, and this is another thing that I just want to kind of help the board understand better. Because this is an apartment complex, it's going to be the same people all the time, coming and going from this facility. So they're going to learn, while it's easy to come in from the turnpike that right in and come over this way, they're going to learn at certain times of the day, rather than going out and going this way and going over to the Lawn Fall intersection, it's going to be easier to come out this exit, go behind the movie theater, and then just follow this fairly clear path all the way around to Hickory. You come out onto Hickory because the levels of service, the capacity is so much greater to get out onto Hickory, and the delays are so much lower that they could get out onto Hickory and travel around the area, even if they come over to Germantown Pike to go where they're going to go. So it's essentially their own route to, let me just narrow it down again, to go out this way and even come in that way if they, once they learn what's the easiest way to come in. And that's what we're going to encourage. And again, because they're the same drivers all the time, they live there, they're going to learn. And plus the management of the building can kind of reinforce it with reminders of, use the Hickory Road access, to get in and out. And that's what our hope is, to encourage people just to use that. But when, if you remember the levels of service, the morning peak hour, there is no reason people can't use the Lawn Fall exit to get in and out. The levels of services are essentially A's and B's at this driveway in the morning. And it's the morning that the apartments are leaving that's the highest exiting volume is in the morning, and there's plenty of capacity over at Lawnfall. So there's no reason they can't exit over at Lawnfall. But in the afternoon, you do have some traffic exiting of the apartments, and they'll learn that it's, and even on Saturday, if they go out, they'll learn it to avoid this intersection, simply follow the path around the back. So just wanted to, again, reinforce these recommendations with the board. And then the final improvement is, again, I think I mentioned it, about improving the signal at Hickory, the traffic light, to help the traffic get in and out with better improving the phase.
Do you have a blow up of that, Joe? I don't remember whether you have a blow up.
No, it's just, I think it's just a note.
Okay.
Add a left turn arrow to help the traffic get out onto Hickory, because there is some delay caused particularly by buses trying to get out when traffic on the opposite side starts up ahead of them, and then they can't get out. With the arrow, they'll be getting out first, and that improves the levels of service also. So
just one more thing before you go. Before you get to the signalized intersection, over here a little bit to the right, you can make a right turn out there.
Correct.
On Hickory. And Hickory takes you back to Narcissa Road, and from Narcissa Road, you can make a left and go to Bluebell.
Correct.
You can avoid the traffic at on Germantown and Butler by going out the back way to the Hickory Road. Is that accurate, Joe?
Yes, absolutely. This gives you connection back through to, like you said, behind, Butler Pike and all those roads back on the other side of the turnpike.
So I would like to, I appreciate that. Now, I'd like to return to one other aspect of Mr. Graham's testimony. Now, Mr. Graham, if I remember this correctly, told us about a limited number of intersections along Germantown Pike, and it gave his opinion or gave facts about the levels of service on certain intersections, certain turning movements. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, yes.
Do you agree with that testimony?
He showed some of the analysis results, but he didn't show it all, in my opinion.
So would you bring up your exhibits and show us what you believe to be the levels of service that will exist after the, well, I guess before and after the redevelopment? And I guess we have to identify this. David, I think there's a whole series of exhibits that we have not numbered. And can we do that offline? We have the 2 or 3 simulations. We have the internal drawings that Joe said. And rather than spend the time now, can we agree to take care of that offline and number all those exhibits?
I will allow you to do that, Mr. Kaplan, and submit that to the board.
Thank you very much. All right, and here's one more that gets numbered. Joe, would you tell us what this is?
This is, it's one PDF, but it's 3 charts. It shows the overall levels of service and delay for the morning. Chart 1 is for the morning, chart 2 is for the afternoon, and chart 3 is for the Saturday peak hour periods.
And this is to demonstrate why you disagree with Mr. Graham's opinion regarding the effect of the traffic from the apartments on the Germantown corridor.
Yes, because, Mr. Graham focused on 3 intersections during the afternoon peak hour. When we looked at 8 intersections that, during 3 peak hours. And as you can see, during the morning peak hour, which is a critical flow along Germantown Pike, there is very little delay for any of the traffic in and out.
Joe, you got to refer to the column. The transcript will not reflect what it is. You've got to walk us through one of these and tell us what it is.
So the first table is a summary of the levels of service during the morning peak hour period at each of the 8 intersections that we studied. And as you can see, in the future without development, the levels of service are primarily A's and B's, and we got one C with very little delay. And then
wait a minute. I want you to tell the board, go down that list and tell them what each one is.
Sure. They're primarily all the accesses that accommodate the mall with the 2 major intersections adjacent to the mall. So it's Germantown Pike and Lawnfall. This is the main access on Germantown Pike. Germantown Pike and the right in, right out, which would be a little bit further to the west, the mall access, and the internal ring road, which in the morning there's very little traffic. Again, this is why apartment traffic could easily go out on Lawnfall, because there's very little traffic in the morning peak hour at that intersection. Then we have the intersection Hickory Road and the mall access opposite Fountain Road, which is a signal. Again, level service A in the morning. Hickory and the West Mall access. This is the one to the west over towards the Turnpike. It's level service A. And the Eastern Mall access on Hickory.
Whoa. The Western Mall, that's not near the Turnpike.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's near Germantown Pike. I'm sorry. It's the one.
Germantown Pike before you get to Hickory, heading west. Is that right?
Well, it's on Hickory.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On Hickory, and it's the access between Germantown and the traffic light on Hickory.
Thank you.
And then the other access, the Eastern Mall access, is the access to the east of the traffic signal. And then here's Germantown Pike and Hickory, level service C in the morning. And then you have Germantown Pike and Plymouth Road. And there's, this is a fact. There is a high delay at that intersection. It accommodates a lot of traffic, and there's a high delay. And, we reported it that way. But the increase in delay from without the apartments, that's what without redevelopment is without the apartments, and then with the redevelopment, which is with the apartments, the increase is 8 seconds. And again, we testified we said in the report, it's less than a 10-second increase is within PennDOT's allowance.
Wait a minute, I missed something. So what you're talking about now, down here at the bottom, only F, is you're talking about Germantown and Plymouth Road, right?
Correct.
Okay, and the increase in the delay, the numbers, tell us what the numbers in parentheses are.
So the analysis shows without the development, the delay is 136 seconds average. And that's, again, this is a theoretical determination based on Synchro, which looks at all of the parameters that are put in for including signal timing, lane configuration, volume, and it estimates what the average overall delay is for the intersection. It's 136 seconds without the development. When you add in the development traffic, which is about a 2% increase, it increases the overall delay by 8 seconds. And again, 8 seconds at an intersection like this is not a significant change when you could be, even this calculation could be off by 10 or 15 seconds, depending on what day you did the counts and all the other different parameters that go into it. So bottom line is there's a certain amount of tolerance for increasing delay that PennDOT allows, and anything under 10 seconds is viewed by PennDOT as not significant, particularly, you're only increasing traffic 2%. All of the other intersections, the levels of service around the mall in the morning peak hour are absolutely fine. So then I go to the afternoon peak hour, which is what Mr. Graham focused on. And, he identified again, the Plymouth and Germantown intersection. Again, there is an increase in delay. We recognize that. It was 6 seconds, but again, it's only 6 seconds. But all of the other accesses are level service C in the afternoon peak hour, or level service B, even an A. And the increase in delay is not significant. The biggest increase in delay is actually the internal ring road, which Mr. Graham actually did show. He showed, 4 additional cars on the ring road in the afternoon peak hour. So the delay actually goes up about 7 seconds, but he did not account for the improvement that we're proposing, which actually lowers the delay down to a B in the afternoon peak hour. So it actually lowers the delay at that intersection during the afternoon peak hour. He did not reflect that improvement in his simulation. And then all the other intersections around the mall have good levels of service. The accesses all have good levels of service. The other thing Mr. Graham did point out is that at Hickory and Germantown Pike during the afternoon peak hour, we did show a C without development, and then it did go to a D with development. That was an oversight on our part because we really didn't worry too much about the delay increase because it was theoretical analysis. The reality of it is, and we checked this, by giving 1 second of green time to Hickory Road, this level of service goes back to a C because the cutoff for C is 35 seconds. So we can actually reduce the overall delay in the future condition down to under 35 seconds and keep it at a C by simply moving 1 second of green time from Hickory Road to Germantown Pike. And again, that's what the synchro analysis it presents, which is the basis for the comparison between without and with development. So that was the afternoon peak hour. And then we also did the Saturday, which Mr. Graham didn't really get into. We do have good levels of service on Saturday. Even Germantown and Plymouth is only a D. The delay is not that high. It's only a 3 second delay increase. What's interesting is the highest delay is the Germantown Pike, the mall axis, and the internal ring road. Again, it's that internal ring road is the biggest delay, and that causes traffic to back up on the ring road. Today it's an E with the additional traffic from the apartments. It'll go to an F, but once we make the improvement and we eliminate those left turns, it goes down to a B. So with the improvement, that intersection on Saturday will work better than it does today, even adding in the mall traffic.
So
I'm sorry, adding in the apartment traffic. I'm sorry.
Joe, add a postscript to that. Mr. Abril was concerned that the Shake Shack driveway that is used for people coming from the Miller's Ale House was blocked up. Tell us what your opinion is of what will happen at that intersection with the improvement to the main access to the mall.
Sure. Looking at the synchro analysis and then looking at the simulation, they both indicate that the queue on the circulation road will reduce by reconfiguring that intersection the way we're recommending. So I know that queue will reduce so that the frequency of that driveway being blocked will reduce. Will it be eliminated completely? Probably not. You will still probably have intervals where there'll be some queue that's blocking that Shake Shack driveway. But I don't think it'll be as often, and I don't think it'll be as much of an issue or as noticeable. But if it is, Preet has told us, after the improvement is done, to take a look at that. And if it's still not working as we had hoped, would there be other things we could do? And the answer is yes. We'll look at other restrictions to help traffic get out from Shake Shack. One of which would be to close off that driveway and just have the traffic exit out from the other driveway, which the queue will definitely not back up that far because it rarely backs up that far now. So it won't back up that far later. But at this point, I don't think we'll need to do that. I think we can implement this improvement and see how it works. And if it doesn't work, we can look to implement other restrictions to address whatever issues whatever remaining issues there are after the improvement is in place.
Mr. DeSantis, is there any other aspect of Mr. Graham's testimony that you would like to comment on? Or is there any other aspect of the many, many questions that were asked of you by the board that you would like to comment on that you and I have not dealt with in the last couple of hours?
The only thing with Mr. Graham's.
One more objection. I know you want to hear this, but I got to know my objection to these questions.
Objections noted, we'll overrule it.
The one item with Mr. Graham's presentation is simply his presentation of the intersection capacity utilization methodology that he presented. The ICU methodology is really just a planning tool, and it's really not an appropriate analysis to be presenting because it's very generic. It just looks at overall volume versus cycle length and the ability of the traffic to get through on that cycle length. It's not sensitive enough like Synchro is or the highway capacity manual methodology is, where it takes into account signal timing is adjusted to provide more timing to the larger volume roadways, which improves the levels of service. And the ICU methodology doesn't have that capability. So when he presented all those E's and F's using the ICU methodology, I didn't think that was appropriate. PennDOT doesn't use that because they know it's not that precise or accurate for what we're trying to do. As far as the other questions, I think we're doing the best we can to address in terms of traffic that whatever the questions that were asked by the board in terms of traffic. I've been involved with the mall for 15 years now, and I know that they spent millions of dollars to add capacity to Germantown Pike, and they've reduced the volume coming in and out of the mall, and they will still have traffic volumes less than what they started with. When Germantown Pike was 4 lanes, they'll have less traffic in and out of the mall, even with the apartments, than they will now that they have 6 lanes on Germantown Pike. So
let me ask you one more question in that regard. So we've had a change in the mall over the 15 years that you've been involved. Is there some reason, in your opinion, related to the changes in use that have contributed to the decrease in the overall volumes?
Yes, I think all the studies are showing it's the uses that are replacing the fully retail. With fully retail, there are spikes that are predictable. There's the afternoon peak hour spike. There's the Saturday spike, which is huge for retail. Once they started introducing other uses, like the restaurants and non-retail uses, you've changed the peaking patterns in and out of the mall. And you've basically reduced the fully retail peak down you may have added other traffic during other periods of the day, but they won't come up to the peaks that they used to be because it's not 100% retail anymore.
David, it's a couple minutes after 10.
Yep.
I'm more than willing to, I will bring Joe back to the next hearing and Peter can question him. I have some other testimony that I would like to present at that time. So
with Mr. DeSantis or?
no, other witnesses.
Other rebuttal witnesses.
Other rebuttal witnesses and answers to the questions that the board has asked. So my suggestion is that we cut it off now and schedule another hearing if that's the pleasure of the board.
Start with my cross of Mr. DeSantis based
Sure,
on.
sure.
Okay. Zoning hearing board members. Well, let me ask Mr. Gunlock as a party, any objection to continuing this until June 28th, 2021 at 7:00 p.m.
No objection.
Thank you. It would be appropriate to entertain a motion, Mr. Chairman, to continue this hearing until Monday, June 28th, 2021 at 7:00 p.m. via Zoom. Is there such a motion?
I will make that motion, yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, well, we'll have Brian popped up first. So Dave will make the motion, Brian second. All those in favor of continuing to June 28th, 2021 at 7:00 p.m. via Zoom, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We're adjourned.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys.
Mr. Cap, off the record. Mr. Kaplan, you'll mark the exhibits appropriately.
Yeah, wait, let me get the
Can you send me
boss.
them too?
Jess, you still here with us?
I am here.
It's your job. Coordinate
got it.
that with David or with Dave Conroy, please.
Sure.
If we could get copies of everything.
And will you get to Rob Gunlock copies of all of our electronic exhibits?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Take care.
Have a good night.
Okay.